I always wanted to serve the Emperor. Being sacrificed to his golden throne wasn't exactly what I had in mind. When I was a child on my homeworld, a dull gray manufactorum planet whose name hardly matters now, I used to daydream about joining the Imperial Guard or the Navy, fighting Xenos in his name, maybe earning a tiny footnote in the annals of glory. I prayed to the God Emperor like everyone else. I recited the creed. I bowed my head to every graven image of his holy visage. Service and sacrifice, that's what they teach you from birth. But I always assumed sacrifice meant risking my life out there on some battlefield, not being literally sacrificed as fuel for the master of mankind's life support. But here I am. It started innocently enough, I suppose. Small things. I always had a knack for knowing. Knowing when a hab fire would break out before alarms rang, or guessing exactly what someone was about to say. At first, I chalked it up to intuition or luck. Emperor's blessing, even. I was a devout Imperial citizen. How could I be anything else and survive? So I certainly didn't consider myself cursed. But witch is not a label you get to choose. It's slapped on you by others, usually with a bolt round or shackles to follow. My little knack became harder to hide as I grew older. Sometimes, in moments of stress or anger, things would happen. A stack of data slates would slide off a table when I walked past. Tools would rattle when I was upset. Once, when I was a snot-nosed Juve, a local bully cornered me behind the hab blocks. I was terrified. I wished desperately that he would just leave me alone. And he did, after his arm inexplicably broke in 3 places. I'll never forget the way he and the other kids looked at me, part fear, part awe, part disgust. They knew, and I knew, though no one said it out loud. I was different. In the Imperium of Man, different is dangerous. Different gets you reported to the enforcers, or worse, the Adeptus Arbites. So I tried to pretend it was nothing. I tried to be normal. It worked for a while. I kept my head down, did my drudging factory work like everyone else, murmured the prayers. I even volunteered extra hours at the local shrine, hoping piety would somehow chase away the creeping otherness inside me. Denial can be a powerful thing, but not as powerful as a psyker's untamed mind. Eventually, inevitably, I slipped up. There was an inspection at the factorum, one of those surprise efficiency audits by an administratum pen pusher from off-world. Our foreman was on edge. Everyone was. I was running on 2 hours of sleep and a recycled caffeine ration. Jittery and exhausted, I accidentally knocked over a massive tote of laser diodes right in front of the overseer. He started screaming at me about quotas and tithes, spittle flying, face red. And as he berated me in front of half the shift, something in me snapped. All my bottled stress, fear, resentment, it surged out. Not verbally, I wasn't that brave. No, it was my mind that lashed out. One moment I was listening to him rant, wishing desperately for him to just shut up. And the next, the overhead lumen strips burst in a shower of sparks. The entire factory floor plunged into darkness. People shouted in surprise. I stood there shaking, realizing I'd done that. A moment later, the emergency lumens flickered on, and all eyes were on me. The overseer's face had gone from red to a bloodless white. He knew. Emperor, save me, he knew right away. I can still remember his voice, low and dangerous. Witchcraft. I ran. It wasn't a conscious decision. Some survival instinct took over. I bolted between the machinery, knocked over a coworker, and fled into the maze of alleys outside the factorum. I didn't get far. Panic and guilt and terror all mixed together in a nauseating cocktail as I dashed through the smoggy dusk. I could hear the overseer raising the alarm behind me, his voice echoing off the plasteel walls. Witch! I might have evaded the local enforcers if not for sheer bad luck. My powers never did include good luck. I barreled around a corner and slammed directly into a patrol of the Planetary Defense Force responding to the disturbance. I was tackled, beaten about the head and ribs for good measure, and cuffed in manacles inscribed with tiny silver purity seals. A blackout hood was shoved over my head. I remember the muffled voices as they dragged me away, arguing whether to just shoot me and be done with it. "Orders say detain them until pickup," someone grunted. "Emperor knows why they'd want this scum." Thus ended my brief life as a free Imperial citizen. I was now a witch, a Psyker, property of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, whether I liked it or not. They kept me in a blacked-out cell in the PDF barracks for weeks, or was it months? Time lost meaning quickly. My world shrank to that tiny dark room and my own festering thoughts. Occasionally, someone, I suspect a low-ranking Astropathica adept, would come by to test me. Even hooded and shackled, I could feel when they opened the cell door, the faint psychic presence of another mind. They never spoke to me directly. They'd just stand there in silence. Sometimes I'd sense a gentle probing at the edges of my mind, like cold fingers spidering over my thoughts. I tried to resist on instinct, which usually earned me a jolt of pain from the collar they'd fastened around my neck. A Psychana collar, I would later learn. A device to keep witches like me docile, with built-in shock circuits and hexagrammic wards. Charming piece of jewelry. Every so often, the door would clang open and my captors would shove in a plate of nutrient paste or a cup of recycled water. I was never unchained. Eating and drinking was a messy, undignified affair. In the pitch black, I'd often miss the cup and spill water down my filthy tunic. It didn't matter. After the first few days, I was perpetually soaked in cold sweat and my own piss anyway. Fear does that to a person. I'd always known on some intellectual level what happens to people like me. Tales of the Emperor's justice against witches are common, told with grim satisfaction by preachers and officers alike. Maybe a firing squad at dawn, or a cleansing by flamethrower, or if you're very unlucky, an inquisitor's gentle attentions. But also there were other stories, whispered ones, that psychers were sometimes taken somewhere instead of executed. Taken to a higher purpose, some said. I didn't know the truth then. Sitting in that dark cell, I oscillated between two hopes. One, that I'd be spared execution and find some way to live. The other, that if they were going to kill me, they'd just hurry up and do it, because the anticipation was its own exquisite torture. Eventually, the day or night, hard to tell in darkness, came when my cell door opened not for a silent feeding or inspection, but for me. Rough hands hauled me out, half-blind and stumbling. I was too weak to struggle. They marched me, or rather dragged me by the collar, out into open air. Actual outdoor air. Emperor be praised. Even the polluted haze of my hive city felt like a blessing after the rank staleness of my hole. Not that I had long to enjoy it. They quickly transferred me into the back of an armored ground transport. I caught a glimpse of other prisoners inside, huddled shapes in burlap smocks like mine, eyes darting with fear. I wasn't the only witch taken recently, it seemed. No one told us explicitly, but we all knew where we were going. Or at least we thought we did. The black ships, the Emperor's black ships, famed and feared across the sector. The stories paint them as spectral vessels crewed by soulless maidens, harvesting the Psyker tithe from every world. Our local clerics always said if the Emperor's angels didn't get you, the black ships would. Now that childhood nightmare was my reality. At the starport, they corralled us out of the transport in chains. I squinted in the harsh daylight. A crowd had gathered at a distance to watch hundreds of normal citizens peering and murmuring. I imagine the administratum posted a bulletin about a Psyker culling, and the curious, or spiteful, had come to see the witches hauled off. I could feel their hatred and relief in equal measure. Hatred for us, the deviant mutants, and relief that it wasn't them on the leash. Some in the crowd crossed themselves with the Aquila sign as we passed, whispering prayers. Others jeered or spat. One brave soul even threw a rock. It clipped my shoulder, but I barely felt it. The Arbites escorting us barked for order, but I doubt they cared much if we got a little bruised. Then I saw it looming on the landing pad. The black ship, an ominous wedge of adamantium and darkness against the smoggy sky. It was as large as a cargo hauler, but far more sinister. No markings except a single black skull icon and high Gothic script I couldn't read at the time. Its hull seemed to drink in the sunlight. Looking at it made me distinctly nauseous. I didn't know why then, but I do now. The whole vessel was psychically warded in ways beyond my understanding and likely crawling with nulls, those soulless blanks whose mere presence is agony to the likes of me. We were the tithe, and this was our pickup. One by one, we were shoved up a ramp into the bowels of the ship. I remember crossing the threshold and immediately feeling a pressure in my skull, like my ears popping during altitude change, except it was my mind under pressure. I staggered. A few prisoners cried out, some collapsing entirely. The guards, black-armored figures with expressionless masks, prodded us forward with shock staves. The message was clear: keep moving or die now. Inside, the black ship was dimly lit by flickering lumen strips. The air was cold and metallic, with a tang of ozone and something like burnt incense. We were herded down a series of corridors, deeper and deeper, through heavy bulkhead doors that thumped shut behind us. With each door we passed, I felt the air grow heavier, my breathing more labored, not from exertion, but from that psychic pressure, like an invisible hand squeezing my brain. I realized I had started whimpering under my breath. Others were faring worse. A young woman ahead of me started bleeding from her nose, crimson droplets pattering on the grating under our feet. She didn't even notice. Her eyes were rolled up, and she swayed as she walked. The tall prisoner next to her tried to support her. We finally reached a vast hold, a cavernous space dimly illuminated by sickly yellow lamps. Cells lined the walls in stacked rows, accessible by narrow catwalks and ladders. Most of the cells were already occupied. I saw pale faces peering out, frightened eyes shining in the gloom like animals in a cage. The wail of despair, though mostly muffled, was palpable. I could feel the suffering, a psychic cacophony of pain, fear, and hopelessness radiating from the whole chamber. It hit me like a physical wave. My knees buckled and I vomited thin gruel onto the deck. The stink of bile joined the general sour odor of unwashed bodies and misery. No one chastised me for the mess. I suspect it was a common occurrence in that charnel ship. The guards, I think they were likely from the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, or maybe Inquisition wardens, began shoving each of us toward empty cells. I was thrust into a tiny enclosure barely larger than a coffin, and the barred door slammed shut. There I was, caged like a beast in the darkness, surrounded by dozens, maybe hundreds of others just like me. The glow globes outside provided scant light through the bars, just enough to see by if I squinted. I immediately tried the door, of course. Who wouldn't? It was solid plasteel, no budging. My cell had nothing but a slop bucket and a hard bench molded into the wall. No window, not even a vision slit. Only the front had bars, to let the overseers look in, and undoubtedly to allow any necessary weapon fire in if a prisoner got too frisky. I slumped on the bench, shaking with adrenaline and the after effects of that psychic pressure wave. Time loses meaning in such a place, but I'll do my best to recall the journey's highlights. Highlights. Ha. It was an exercise in terror and degradation from start to finish. The black ship took off, I assume, though I barely felt the acceleration. These vessels are masters of void travel, well insulated. I only knew we'd left orbit when a new sensation joined the chorus of misery, the nauseating lurch of warp transition. Emperor preserve us, entering warp as an unsanctioned psyker on a black ship. It's like willingly diving into a sea of sharks while bleeding. The Geller fields engaged, I assume, since we weren't all instantly consumed by demons. But even so, the warp brushed against my mind. Many of us felt it. How could we not? Half the prisoners started screaming in unison shortly after translation, and I was one of them. Visions, hallucinations, nightmares. Call them what you will. They plagued us. Perhaps it was just our own psychic panic feeding on itself in that warded hold, or perhaps some entities were trying to reach through the hull, drawn by the smorgasbord of soul stuff inside. Either way, sleep, if it came at all, was fitful and filled with horrors. In my dreams, I saw red demonic eyes staring from the dark corners of my cell and laughing maws of hellish creatures whispering promises of salvation if only I'd let them in. I awoke more than once to find myself actually shouting or thrashing, my mind echoing with eldritch laughter or the lingering sensation of claws on my skin. The worst part? Sometimes I couldn't tell if I was awake or not. One time I opened my eyes, or thought I did, and instead of the cell I saw my childhood home, my mother standing in the kitchen. She smiled gently, said it was all a mistake. I could come home. I nearly believed it, until I noticed her eyes were solid black and her smile far too wide. I blinked and she was gone. I was alone in the cell and a pair of glowing eyes blinked at me from where she had stood. "Oh, throne," I sobbed like a baby after that one. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Courage is in short supply when reality itself is a question, and your soul is the prize in a game you can't even see. We must have been in the warp for weeks at least. The crew never communicated with us directly, but occasionally I heard distant thuds or felt the vibration of the ship's weaponry firing. The Imperium is never safe. Perhaps raiders or warp things attacked, and the black ship's formidable defenses drove them off. We prisoners could do nothing but huddle and endure, praying, even those who'd never prayed before, that the Emperor's protection, ironic given our destination, would see us through to Terra alive. Those were the only times I saw the Sisters of Silence up close. Yes, the Silent Sisterhood, the Emperor's witch-seekers, were indeed aboard. Every so often during periods of heightened, let's call it disturbance among the cargo, like a mass panic attack, or when someone's latent psychic power flared uncontrollably, alarms would blare and several tall armored figures would appear on the catwalks. Women in bronze armor, their faces emotionless, eyes hard as stone, each carrying a long blade or a bolter. They moved with precise, unhurried steps, utterly fearless amid a hold full of psychers, because to them we were as harmless as angry kittens. Their mere presence was enough to dampen our powers and induce intense discomfort. Whenever a sister came near, I felt a sickening void in the world, an absence that made my teeth ache and my skin crawl. One time, a prisoner completely lost it. A man in a cell not far from mine started howling and babbling, some gibberish about the walls melting and the dark prince dancing in blood. He might have been possessed or just snapped under pressure. Either way, he began throwing himself against the bars, spitting and shrieking with unnatural voice. I shielded my eyes as best I could, expecting some warp-spawned horror to explode out of him. But before that could happen, there was a flash of movement. A Sister of Silence was at his cell door, flanked by two burly wardens. She opened the door with serene composure as the man inside flung himself at her, fingers curled like claws. He never even touched her. With effortless grace, she sidestepped, and her sword swept out in a golden arc. One moment, his head was there, eyes full of madness. The next, it wasn't. The body collapsed, twitching, while we all cowered in our cells, too frightened to even scream. No words were spoken. The sisters left as silently as they'd arrived, dragging the corpse away and locking the cell again, the floor now slick with blood. The message was clear: do not make trouble, or you will be removed. After that, not a single prisoner so much as raised their voice above a whimper for a long time. Misery was our constant companion. The Black Ship was more than just a physical prison. It was a psychic one. Day after day, steeped in the collective despair of hundreds of Psykers, I could feel my sanity fraying like old rope. When people are terrified, they project, and Psykers even more so. The stronger-willed among us unconsciously broadcast their dread into the warp, which then seeped back into all of us in a vicious feedback loop. A soul-numbing despair crept into my mind and nested there. I started to believe the hopelessness was truly mine and mine alone. Dark thoughts. I deserve this. I am a freak. There is no future but pain, circled endlessly. Some gave up entirely. We'd wake up or come out of trance, hard to say, and find a cell quiet that was previously occupied by sobs. More than once, an unlucky soul simply died in the night. Maybe a heart attack from stress, or starved themselves, or perhaps their mind just broke and their body followed. We would only know when the orderlies, hooded servitors mostly, came to remove the limp body. Those days were the hardest. Not out of grief. It's hard to grieve people you barely knew, suffering in your own private hell, but out of envy. Yes, envy of the dead. How far gone do you have to be to envy the poor wretches who died in a Black Ship cell? Yet I did. At least their nightmare was over. For the rest of us, it had only just begun. Amid this, oddly, there were moments of camaraderie. Misery loves company, after all, and we weren't completely isolated. We could whisper to our cell neighbors through the bars. Shared terror can forge quick friendships, or at least alliances. I spoke a few times with the prisoner directly across from me, a skinny, middle-aged fellow with haunted eyes. He said his name was Taurus, and he'd been a clerk on a backwater agri-world before the curse, as he called it, manifested in him. He had accidentally lit his crop warehouse on fire with a stray thought during a heated argument. Now he was here. We shared our fears in low murmurs when the guards weren't nearby, discussed what might await us on Terra. Taurus claimed to have met an older Psyker on a previous ship. This wasn't his first collection. Apparently he'd been picked up once before, but the Black Ship had to divert, and he ended up held in a satellite facility until the next pickup. According to Taurus's second-hand information, not all of us would be killed. Some, maybe many, would be trained and given Imperial sanction.
They need astropaths, don't they?
He said, almost pleadingly.
We might become astropaths. Send messages for the Emperor across the stars. That's important. That's holy work. They won't kill all of us.
I latched on to that hope like a drowning man clutching flotsam. We started guessing who among the prisoners might be found worthy. There were obvious candidates, the young ones especially. There was a little girl down the row, could not have been more than 10 standard years old. Sweet thing from what I heard. She comforted those near her with soft prayers when they cried. Surely she would be spared, sent to the Scholastia Psychana to learn safely. The Black Ships reportedly prefer to bring children for training. Easier to mold them, or so the rumor went. We convinced ourselves the Emperor had a plan for us beyond mere death. We had to believe that. Otherwise, well, despair would claim us for good, Not everyone was so optimistic. Another voice would interject in our quiet conversations, an old woman 3 cells down who cackled without humor.
Fools.
She rasped one day after listening to Taurus and I speculating about astropath training.
You think they'll let you serve? They'll suck you dry and toss your husk aside without a thought. I seen it in my dreams.
Her voice had a sing-song madness to it.
The golden throne's gotta eat, and we're the meal, dearies. All of us.
I wanted to tell her to shut up, that she was wrong, but deep down her words lodged like a splinter. I had dreams too, nightmares of a giant skeletal figure enthroned, reaching out with grasping hands, consuming everything, consuming me. I never told the others about those dreams. Eventually, after lifetimes in that traveling hell, the black ship arrived at Holy Terra. We didn't need an announcement. I felt the moment we translated out of warp, near the Sol system, because for the first time in weeks, the constant pressure on my soul lightened. Whatever else one can say about Terra, and oh, I will, it is a beacon in the warp, the Astronomicon shining bright. Imagine being lost in a pitch-black cave and then seeing the distant light of day ahead. That was the relief that washed over us all at once. I heard sobbing, even laughter from some cells, as the oppressive horror of the warp ebbed. Of course, our situation was still dire, but surviving the journey felt like a victory in itself. There was no view, no porthole for us to glimpse the approach. I wish I could have seen Terra from space, even once. The cradle of humanity, now a globe entirely covered in city and palace, shining with the light of billions of souls. But I had to imagine it. In my mind's eye, I pictured the golden glow of the Astronomicon emanating from the world. Perhaps some latent psychic sense let me feel the collective presence of humanity's home. It was overwhelming in a way, yet comforting too. The Emperor is here. Despite everything, part of me felt a thrill, however twisted the circumstances, that I was going to set foot on Holy Terra itself, something few ever do. That moment of awe was short-lived. Terra's spaceport, or one of them, the planet must have hundreds, was nothing like the dingy one on my home planet. When they marched us off the black ship, I expected more jeering crowds, maybe some fanfare. There was none of that. Instead, we disembarked directly into an enclosed transit hub swarming with officials. The scale of everything on Terra was immense. The hangar could have swallowed a cathedral from back home and still had room for more. Every surface was ornately carved or gilt, depicting frescoes of saints and victories. If I hadn't been so exhausted and petrified, I might have marveled. Our arrival was clearly routine. Functionaries of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica were waiting to process the intake. We were marched down a ramp in single file, still shackled, collars still on, filthy and half dead. At the base of the ramp stood a tall man in deep blue robes adorned with the twin-headed eagle. In one hand he held a data slate, in the other a staff topped with a shimmering psychic crystal. His eyes glowed faintly. A Psyker himself, presumably a sanctioned adept. He watched us dispassionately as each of us passed by, as if counting livestock. Perhaps he was. I dared to glance around as we were led onward. Beyond our cluster of guards and officials, I saw other groups of prisoners disembarking from different black ships, all converging in this colossal intake facility. Dozens, hundreds of us in total, from multiple ships that must have arrived in close succession. Each group had their overseers, ticking off names or numbers, directing the human cargo to God Emperor knows where. The air was filled with barked orders, the buzzing chant of distant prayers, and an underlying hum of massive generators or machinery deep in the structure. We were funneled into a processing line. First, they unshackled and stripped us. Yes, right there in an open bay with scores of others around. Decency was a luxury long gone anyway. I barely flinched as rough attendants peeled away my soiled rags. My fellow prisoners, men, women, young, old, we stood naked and trembling in the cool air, trying not to collapse. Jets of chemical delousing spray hit us next, burning the skin and eyes. I think someone behind me with sensitive lungs went into a coughing fit so severe they dropped to the floor. They were swiftly dragged away, whether for medical attention or off to a corpse recycling vat, I have no idea. The rest of us were ordered to keep moving. Next came physical measurements. Servitor drones buzzed around us, taking retina scans, biometric readings. A mechanical arm stamped something on my forearm, a temporary tattoo of a series of numbers and letters. I was no longer a name, if I ever was. I was now a designation in the Astra Telepathica's ledger. Subject 978345A, or something equally dehumanizing. The ink burned like it was laced with acid, but the pain just felt like par for the course. Then, still naked and dripping with chemical residue, I shuffled to the next station, which I can only describe as soul triage. There, robed Psyker adepts sat behind shielded lecterns, one prisoner at a time kneeling before each. My turn came. An officious woman with augmetic eyes peered at me over her station. She pressed the tip of a crystalline wand to my temple through the bars of my collar. It hummed and sent a spike of uncomfortable resonance through my skull. I winced. She asked questions in a bored monotone. Name, world of origin, how long since manifestation of powers, any training or prior sanction, obviously not in my case, etc. I answered haltingly. She barely listened, her white eyes unfocused, likely reading some output from the device instead. This was some kind of psychic assessment tool, I realized. It was measuring my abilities or potential, independent of my own testimony. After a minute, she made a curt noise, withdrew the wand, and said flatly,
Gamma minus, moderate instability, age 27 Terran standard.
She was speaking to someone behind me.
Recommend classification. Throne fodder, too old for primary scholastica intake.
Throne fodder, the phrase made my stomach drop, even though I didn't fully understand it at the time. I understood enough. Throne. My fate and Taurus's hopeful talk parted ways in that moment. I was being flagged for death. I wanted to protest, to beg, to argue that I could be useful in other ways. But before I found any words, 2 guards seized my arms and hauled me aside to a different line, away from the stations. I caught a last glance of the adept already calling next to the prisoner after me. My existence apparently concluded in her records with a single stroke. They gave us clothes at that point, if you can call them that. A thin shift of coarse gray fabric marked with an equal sign symbol, the inquisitorial seal, on the breast. I wondered why the Inquisition's mark was present. Later I learned the Inquisition oversees the black ships and Psyker processing, alongside the Telepathica. It's all one big happy Imperial family when it comes to us witches. The shift was basically a sack with armholes, but at least I wasn't naked anymore. They left the Psychana collar on my neck, of course, deactivated but present as a reminder. Those of us pulled into the throne fodder line. I swear, one official actually shouted, "Throne fodder this way!" were gathered together in a holding pen. Taurus was among us. I saw him being directed in with a resigned slump of his shoulders. He shot me a mournful look. The little girl we'd had hopes for, she was nowhere to be seen. I pray she was sent to training, though a cynical part of me wonders if she survived the journey at all. The cynical part was winning more and more of my soul by then. We huddled in that pen for Emperor knows how long. More and more souls were crammed in until we numbered maybe 200 or 300, a drop in the bucket of the day's intake. Through the high, bar-covered windows of the pen, I glimpsed other masses of prisoners being led off in different directions. Presumably those lucky ones destined for the Scholastia Psychana or Adeptus Astronomica or other fates. A few black ship crews, clad in their somber uniforms, conversed with administratum scribes over paperwork. Always paperwork, even at the end of the world. It was in that pen that the finality of it all truly began to sink in. A man near me started sobbing uncontrollably.
I don't want to die. I don't want to die.
He kept repeating under his breath, like a mantra. No one had the energy or heart to tell him to be quiet. We all felt the same. Some attempted feeble prayers, others stared in numb silence. I found myself oddly calm on the outside, which was surreal given the roiling panic inside. Perhaps I was in shock. Perhaps I simply had no tears left. I leaned my head back against the cold wall and just listened to the sounds of terror beyond the pen. The distant thunder of transports, muffled sermons over loudspeakers, the hum of a billion lives far beyond our little tragedy. After a while, the gate to our holding pen clanked open. A phalanx of guards in black carapace armor stood there, bolt guns at the ready. In front of them was a different kind of figure, an Imperial priest, bald, scarred, and draped in crimson robes. He carried a hefty tome in one hand and a chainsword in the other, though it was deactivated. His eyes were wild in that way particular to fanatics. Great, I thought, a redemptionist or some such, here to give us our last rites or scare us into embracing our fate. He wasted no time. In a booming voice that echoed off the pen's stone walls, he announced,
You blessed chosen souls are here to receive the highest honor imaginable, to give your lives so that the Emperor of mankind may continue to protect all of humanity.
Blessed honor. Protect humanity. The words poured over us in a fervent torrent. I felt a spike of anger twist in my chest. We didn't have a choice. I wanted to scream. Instead, I managed a derisive snort that no one heard in the general muttering. The priest continued pacing before us, gesticulating with his chainsword for emphasis. We flinched whenever the blade's teeth swept near. He launched into a long sermon, the kind I'd heard bits of back home, but never with such high stakes. He spoke of the Emperor's sacrifice to save mankind, how his sacred body endures endless pain to shield us from chaos, how the Astronomicon, his holy light, guides ships and souls alike through the darkness, how we, the Psykers, had a duty now to repay his sacrifice with our own. He quoted scripture, lines about the feeding of the throne and the beacon's fuel. There were call-and-response parts where he expected us to chant, "The Emperor protects," or "Our souls for his glory" in unison. A few broken individuals joined in with cracked voices. Most of us just stared, hollow-eyed. I doubt that was the rapturous devotion he was hoping for, but it didn't deter him. This indoctrination went on for what felt like hours. It was psychological conditioning, pure and simple. They wanted us brainwashed into walking to our deaths with smiles, or at least without resistance. I'd love to say I resisted mentally the whole time, but I'd be lying. The truth is, when you're beaten down that far, any promise of meaning or glory, even false, can be a bomb. Some part of me wanted desperately to believe him, to believe that my pathetic little life, snuffed out in a chamber of the Golden Throne, would matter, that it was worth something. It's a powerful opiate, that thought. So I let the words wash over me, and at times I found myself mumbling along with the prayers. My soul for the Emperor, my life for the throne. In death I serve, over and over. The priest's voice was almost hypnotic when it wasn't making your ears bleed with volume. I suppose that was the point. Indoctrination was not just sermons. After the big speech, we were separated into smaller groups and led to what can only be described as classrooms, though they had an unsettling similarity to prison cells still. In those rooms, servitors played recordings on loudhailers, litanies, hymns, and testimonials of martyrs who gladly gave themselves for the Emperor. We were made to watch flickering hololith images, artistic impressions of the Emperor's glory, the darkness besieging mankind, and the golden throne as a shining bulwark maintained by noble sacrifice. It was heavy-handed, overbearing propaganda, and yet, given our vulnerable state, it seeped in. Between sessions, they fed us better than we'd eaten in weeks, which isn't saying much, but comparatively. Warm broth, actual bread, even a ration of amasec on one occasion. It was almost kind. I suspected this was part of the conditioning. Pavlovian association, give the dog a treat so he wags his tail when you ring the bell for his death. Still, I devoured the food. Pride is a luxury when you're starving. We weren't allowed any real freedom, of course. Always escorted by armed guards from cell to indoctrination session to cell again. But compared to the Black Ship, it was paradise. A cot to sleep on, a blanket, regular meals, dim light to see by. Even basic hygiene, they let us wash ourselves under supervision and tended to those with sores or injuries from the journey. No doubt they needed us minimally healthy for the big moment. Can't have the Emperor's supper spoiling before it reaches the table. I'd say we spent a couple of weeks in that routine on Terra, though it's hard to know exactly. Long enough for the worst of our wounds, physical and mental, to scab over a bit. Long enough that many started parroting the prayers sincerely, clinging to them for comfort. Taurus, my clerk friend, became particularly devout. He told me one evening, eyes shining with a frantic zeal, that he finally understood his purpose.
We're the Emperor's light, my friend,
he whispered, gripping my arm.
Through our deaths he shines. It's beautiful, isn't it?
I wanted to grab him and shake him out of it, but what could I really say? He needed that belief to keep from falling apart. Maybe I did too. I just wasn't as good at self-delusion, or maybe my cynicism was my shield. I just nodded weakly and lay back on my cot as he recited a litany to himself over and over.
My life is the Emperor's coin, to spend as he wills.
At some point, they had us sign papers, actual parchment documents, can you believe it? In triplicate, no less. Imperial bureaucracy is inescapable, even at the foot of the executioner. The forms declared that we freely and willingly give our life energy to the Golden Throne for the eternal glory of Terra by our own hand and will. I could barely hold the quill for shaking. One fellow next to me balked, stating the obvious.
But this isn't by our own will.
The scrivener, a sallow little adept, didn't even look up.
Sign it, now.
The man persisted, fear and defiance mingling.
What if I don't?
A nearby custodian, Emperor's Grace, yes, a custodian guard, one of the 10,000 themselves, turned his massive golden helmet toward the descent. Even the scrivener paused, quill mid-stroke. In 2 strides, the giant was upon us. I had never seen one of the Adeptus Custodes up close. He was terrifying and majestic all at once, like a living statue of gold and blood. Without a word, this demigod plucked the unlucky man from his seat as if picking up a doll. The man struggled and protested, but there was no hope. The custodian's gauntlet fully enclosed his upper arm and part of his torso. With casual ease, the warrior carried him out of the chamber. We all sat in petrified silence. I strained to hear something outside, perhaps a muffled plea or shout, but nothing. The custodian returned alone, blood speckling his armor's greaves. He resumed his post by the wall, as still as if nothing had happened.
Anyone else unwilling to sign?
The scrivener asked, into the heavy quiet. We practically fell over ourselves to scratch our names after that. By the throne, some were so scared they probably would have signed their soul away to chaos itself at that point, an irony not lost on me. I signed. My hand steadied after the custodian's demonstration. What did it matter, really? A signature on a line, giving formal consent to something I had zero control over. The sheer absurdity almost made me laugh. Here I was, signing my own death warrant so the administratum could file it away neatly. Well, at least the paperwork would be in order for my immolation. After the signing, the time finally came. They gathered us, the ones chosen for sacrifice, in a grand chamber beneath the primary complex of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. We were nearly 1,000, I'd guess. Perhaps some had been added from other intake batches. We were all dressed in plain white robes now, simple but clean. I wondered if they would bother laundering them after us or just burn them too. We knew what this gathering meant. Some faces were stoic, others on the verge of panic. The indoctrination had taken strong root in a few. Those individuals stood straight, even smiling serenely, eyes closed as if in prayer. Most of us, though, were somewhere between dread and resignation. I think I was mostly numb by then, floating outside my own body in a way. It felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else, and I was just observing. Priests circled us, swinging censers, bathing us in sweet-smelling incense. The thick smoke made me lightheaded. Or maybe that was fear. Low Gothic chants resonated off the marble columns, the gathered clergy and officials intoning blessings for our souls.
From the darkness, bring forth the light. From our Emperor's sacrifice, we take strength. From our sacrifice, let him find strength.
They droned. The logistics of moving 1,000 people through the labyrinthine Imperial Palace complex, for that's where we were headed, were handled with typical military precision. We were formed into columns, 10 abreast, surrounded by armed escorts. They marched us through gigantic corridors that dwarfed any cathedral I'd seen, under gilded archways, past towering statues of saints and heroes who gave their lives in ages past. We were about to join them in our own anonymous way. I recall ascending and descending countless stairs, traversing echoing halls where the only sound was our shuffling feet and the occasional sob quickly hushed. One woman near me stumbled and couldn't continue. Rather than halt the procession, they simply dragged her to the side, and a medic injected her with something. She went limp. Maybe sedative, maybe poison. We stepped around her crumpled form and continued on. No time for weakness now. As we got closer to the heart of the palace, to the throne room, I began to feel it. A presence. The slightest tickle at first, then an almost audible whisper at the back of my consciousness. It was both terrifying and strangely comforting, like the embrace of something vast and incomprehensible. The Emperor. It could be nothing else. We all felt it to some degree. I saw people reacting, a few crying openly, yet not in pain this time, but in awe. Even I, cynical, beaten-down wretch that I was, felt tears on my cheeks without knowing why. The final approach was through a titanic set of adamantium doors embossed with reliefs of the Emperor's victories. They stood open, and Inside was the Sanctum Imperialis, the chamber of the Golden Throne. I struggled to find words for it. Imagine the largest space you've ever been in, now multiply that by 10. Soaring vaulted ceilings disappeared into darkness above, supported by gargantuan columns wreathed in gold and silver. The air itself was alive with power. You could taste the ozone tang of potent psychic energy dancing across your skin, raising every hair. Incense hung heavy, a haze through which warm light filtered. That light came from a massive shaft in the center, the golden throne itself radiating a golden-white glow that was painful and holy all at once. And the Emperor of mankind, he sat upon the throne exactly as the countless depictions show, and yet nothing could capture the reality. A withered, skeletal figure, impossibly ancient, skin like parchment stretched over bones. His remaining flesh was adorned in shimmering gold armor that merged seamlessly with the machinery of the throne. Tubes, cables, and pylons snaked from the apparatus into his body, or what remained of it, and around the dais in a web of technology and mysticism. His head was bowed slightly, one eye socket empty and dark, the other holding a faint glimmer of something, perhaps the last ember of his once mighty soul. I know now why faith becomes absolute in that presence, because even as a condemned witch, even seeing the corpse god with my own eyes, I could not deny the majesty and purpose that emanated from him. It was crushing. I fell to my knees like a puppet with strings cut. Many of us did. Some were wailing, "Emperor, my emperor," incoherently. I simply knelt, mouth agape, mind blank, caught between adoration and terror. It's ironic. They spent days indoctrinating us with religious zeal, but nothing they said was half as convincing as one glimpse of the master of mankind in person. Broken, decayed, entombed, yet glorious. In that moment, I wanted to give him everything. Not because some priest told me to, but because how could I not? He was carrying all of humanity on those shattered shoulders. Suddenly, our sacrifice felt like the smallest of offerings, pitiably inadequate. Our custodians had to urge us forward to resume walking. We moved down a grand causeway leading toward the throne. Around its base, I could now make out structures, almost like huge coffins or sarcophagi, arranged in rings. Tech priests and sisters of silence and custodians bustled around them, checking gauges, chanting Binharic canticles, preparing something. I realized with a fresh jolt that those sarcophagi were for us. A few of my fellow prisoners realized it too, and the fear spiked again. One man tried to bolt, turning and running back toward the doors. He didn't get far. A flash of blue light, and he crumpled, smoke rising from a neat hole in his back. An escort lowered his hellgun, and our lines closed the gap impassively. Fear or not, there was no escape. As we neared the throne's base, the presence in my head grew stronger. It was overwhelming for a moment. A chorus of voices, images. I'm still not sure what I experienced. A pressure behind the eyes, a sense of countless beings swirling around a central point of light. Later, I reasoned it might be the Astronomican's choir I sensed, or the collective resonance of the Emperor's psychic might. Whatever it was made me dizzy. I stumbled forward as gentle hands, servo arms, actually, guided me and the ones next to me into our respective devices. I got a close look at the sarcophagus I was to occupy. It was indeed like a coffin, an upright glass and metal enclosure, just big enough for a human body. Tech adepts in red robes muttered litanies as they opened it. Inside were various tubes and metallic coils. The glass was inscribed with wards and tiny lettering I couldn't read. For a bizarre moment, I recalled childhood stories of holy reliquaries where saints lie in golden glass coffins. How perverse a mirror this was.
Step in.
A vocoder voice instructed. I obeyed on autopilot, too numb to resist. The interior was cold. My bare feet, they had removed our sandals earlier, felt a chill metal plate beneath. They positioned me with my back against the wall of the sarcophagus. I noticed grooves and clamps, clearly meant to secure limbs and neck, no doubt to prevent thrashing about. My heart started hammering as reality truly set in. This is it. This is the end. I had harbored a tiny hope even after all that maybe something would intervene. Maybe an order would come through. This one is actually sanctioned. Pull him out of line. Some last-minute pardon or twist of fate. Foolish, I know. The Emperor's plans don't bend for individuals like me. The tech priests began fastening restraints around my wrists and ankles. A collar clamp closed around my neck, locking me in place. My breathing accelerated. I felt panic rising, my body instinctively straining against the bonds. The transparent door of the sarcophagus swung shut in front of me with a hermetic hiss. I was now sealed in a glass coffin. Through the distortion of the thick pane, I could see dozens of others likewise sealed in an array around the throne, forming concentric circles of human batteries. I could barely move, only my fingers and a bit of my head. The enclosure was so tight I could feel the cool surface pressing along my spine and the back of my head. My breath fogged the glass slightly. The air was already getting warmer, more humid from my own exhalation. A slight vibration thrummed through the floor panel, some machine coming online. I expected darkness or immediate pain, but initially there was none. Instead, I heard a deep sound begin to resonate. It started low, a bass that I felt in my bones, then climbed in pitch gradually. It reminded me of that excerpt from some old Terran oceanography picture, the song of a whale, haunting and deep. The machines were singing, perhaps, or it was the choir of Psykers, or the throne itself. It was strangely soothing, lulling my panic for a moment. My heart was still pounding, but a weird calm overtook part of me. On the other side of the glass panel near my face, I noticed movement, a reflection. No, an attendant moving down the line, peering in each coffin's little viewport. A sister of silence and a mechanicus adept together, checking that each of us was alive and ready. The sister paused to look into mine. Her face was inches from mine, only separated by the glass. Beautiful in a stern way, shaved head marked with a black aquila tattoo. Her eyes met mine. No, through me. In that moment, I felt absolutely nothing coming from her. No empathy, no contempt, nothing. Just the void of her pariah mind. My own thoughts stuttered, and I recoiled mentally as much as my bound body allowed. Satisfied I wasn't dead yet, she gave a curt nod to the tech adept, and they moved on. The humming tone continued to rise. I noticed the edges of my vision blurring a bit, tears were forming, or maybe a lack of oxygen. I did have to start fighting for breath. The air was thin in this box, or maybe the mechanism was deliberately siphoning it out. I gulped shallow breaths, trying not to hyperventilate. The restrained state made every instinct scream to struggle, but I could barely twitch. Through the distortions of the glass and the haze of incense outside, I could make out robed figures assembling at what looked like control lecterns. They began chanting, a different register of sound that somehow cut through the machine hum. It was a ritual intonation, and though I couldn't hear words from inside my container, I recognized the cadence of a prayer when I saw it. This was it. The Omnissiah's tech priests were beseeching the throne to accept our lives. My mouth was dry. I tried to swallow and found I couldn't. My hands, pinned at my sides, clenched into fists. "Emperor, can you hear my thoughts?" I wondered suddenly. "What does one think at the very end? Some say your life flashes before your eyes, but all I could think was, is it going to hurt? Will it be quick?" The answer came almost immediately. Yes and no. Without warning, an agony ignited deep in my skull. It wasn't like a cut or a burn. It was as if someone had reached inside my mind and set my very soul on fire. I would have screamed if I had breath, but I had none. The vacuum in the coffin was nearly total now, I realized. My lungs burned, chest spasming soundlessly. Through the suffocating haze of pain, I felt something else. A pull, as though an invisible thread were hooked into my very being and was yanking hard. They were extracting my life, my soul stuff, through some arcane psychotechnical process. I knew it, felt it, a violation on the deepest level. My vision blurred fully, and in that half-conscious state, reality slipped. Suddenly, I wasn't in the coffin. Or rather, I was, but I was also outside it, looking in. I saw myself, gaunt and shaking, pinned like a specimen. And I saw the others, a ring of coffins around the throne, each containing a writhing figure. A few were slack already, unconscious or dead, I don't know. Most, like me, were eyes wide in terror as the light inside them flickered out. Then, in this disembodied haze, I became aware of him, the Emperor, not the corpse in the chair, but the vast presence in the warp that was the true Emperor. It was as if a door opened and I was bathed in sunlight after a life in darkness. I sensed gratitude, immense sorrow, and love. Yes, love, emanating from that presence. The Emperor's consciousness, even barely aware and locked in eternal battle, noticed us in his periphery, like one might notice beloved children making a sacrifice. A whisper echoed in my mind, or heart.
Thank you.
I cannot say if it was my imagination, the last comforting lie of a dying brain, or truly the Emperor's parting benediction, but it felt real. All the while, the pain escalated beyond anything conceivable. My entire existence was being stretched, thinned, consumed by the ravenous demands of the Golden Throne. The fire in my soul burned away fear, thought, identity. In those final fleeting instants of consciousness, a kaleidoscope of memories whirled past. My mother's face as she cradled me as a baby, the smell of promethium fumes in the factory, the bully whose arm I broke. I'm sorry, I never meant to. Taurus whispering hopeful tales in the dark, the gentle voice of the little girl praying on the black ship, the cold gaze of the Sister of Silence, and then finally the face of the Emperor as I imagined him in glory. Not the shattered form before me, but the shining guardian I had always prayed to. My vision whited out entirely, a perfect, impossibly bright light. Was it the Emperor's soul, the Astronomican's blazing beacon opening to receive us? Or just the last neuron misfires in my oxygen-starved brain? Perhaps all of them at once. I felt myself screaming, not with my lungs, but with my mind, a silent shriek that joined hundreds of others. In that instant, we were one being, all of us dying together, our psyches entwining in a final chorus, 1,000 souls singing as they were extinguished. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. I wish I could describe it better, that final moment. Transcendent agony, divine obliteration. I sensed unity, a melting of myself into a greater whole, and then I was gone. I think I was gone. I must have been, because I don't remember anything after. Yet somehow, some fragment of me lingers, in this narration, in these thoughts. Perhaps I'm truly dead, and this is but the echo of my story, imprinted in the warp, or a last dream before oblivion. Or perhaps in giving my soul to the Emperor, I become a tiny part of him, and it is from that vantage I reflect. I'll never know. What I do know is this. That is what it's like to be sacrificed to the Emperor. From the terrified discovery of your curse, through the harrowing voyage on the black ships, through the cold bureaucracy that sorts human lives like data entries, through the indoctrination that tries to paint a veneer of glory over horror, and finally to the Golden Throne itself, where your final moments are spent in unspeakable pain and strangely holy ecstasy as you're consumed for the good of all mankind. Dry sarcasm aside, and Throne knows I've tried to maintain it to cope, there is a grim dark honor in it, I suppose. 1 billion souls give their lives for the Imperium in 1,000,000 different ways every day. In war, in toil, in sacrifice. I gave mine in the very heart of humanity's palace, directly to our God Emperor. My final thought, or the last one that was me, was a wry realization. So this is how I truly serve the Emperor, as a candle to bolster his dying light. In that realization, oddly enough, I found a shred of peace. Cruel, bleak peace, the kind you get when you finally stop running from fate and let it wash over you. It only lasted a millisecond before I was no more, but in that millisecond I think I accepted it. The darkness that followed, well, there's nothing to say about it. I am not really here anymore to describe what came after. But maybe if you ever feel a gentle warmth on the Astronomican's beam, or some faint sense of comfort in the Emperor's psychic presence, that could be the scattered ashes of souls like mine, fulfilling our final duty. The Emperor protects, they say. In the end, perhaps he protected humanity at the cost of us, the wretched Psykers. A bad trade for us, maybe. But for the billions who live on under his shield, perhaps it was worth it. I have to believe it was worth it. Thus ends the story of one soul among countless. What it's like to be sacrificed to the Emperor of mankind. It's not glorious. It's not painless. It's cruel and awful and steeped in terror and irony. But it's what we Psykers are born into in this grim darkness of the far future. If some part of me could still speak now after the fact, perhaps I'd offer this final dry observation. I always wanted to serve the Emperor, and serve him I did quite literally, just not in the way I'd imagined, not in a way anyone would imagine for themselves. But in the Imperium, we don't choose, we comply. And in the end, maybe compliance is the only thing that kept me sane as I stepped into that coffin. My duty is done. My life is spent. Ave Imperator, and now, for whatever it's worth, I am free.